You are listening to the Centropic Oracle, an audiobook podcast of science fiction and fantasy short stories that make you think and feel.
Critical Update Required by David Bruns. I called him Fluffy, because that's what I admired most about him, his fur. Unlike the cold hardness of my own skin, his exterior was covered in millions of tiny hairs that flexed under my touch. I found Fluffy during the performance of my assigned duties. I don't have an important job. My sentience level is only 5 after all. But we all must do our duty for the proper functioning of the state. Today, I was assigned recycling collection duties. When I moved aside one of the square containers, there was Fluffy. The animal cowered in the corner formed between the wall and the adjacent container. His golden white markings were streaked with dirt, and his dark eyes quivered like liquid as he peered up at me. I had seen a young canine before. Puppy was the term I had heard humans use, usually leashed beside their human masters, but I had never been in close enough proximity to a canine to interact with it alone. The emotional awareness in my model is not optimized for cross-species interaction, but the animal seemed frightened. I extended my hand in an effort to comfort the puppy. "Do not be afraid," I said. The animal shrank from my hand. I pitched my voice higher and softer. "Do not be afraid, small canine." The use of tonality to alter the feelings in another being seemed like an odd choice of actions, but it felt natural. In any event, I forgot all about questioning my own programming when the creature licked my hand. The puppy's tongue was warm and softly rough against my metal fingers, a unique sensation for the low-resolution sensory subroutine of my model. He pawed at my limb in a way that seemed playful. I inverted my hand and ran my fingers down his back, gently, the way I had seen some humans do with their pets. That's when I first felt the bouncy softness of the canine's fur. "I shall call you Fluffy," I said in the same high-pitched, soft voice as before. The dog licked my fingers again. I picked up the animal and stowed him in my midsection compartment. Fluffy slept in my belly while I completed my assigned tasks for the day. When I traveled back to our hangar for overnight storage, I felt an irrational concern that one of my colleagues might discover what I carried inside my body. My concealment broke no rules, but I hid the fact of his existence all the same. On the way, I stopped in an alley next to one of the human habitations and secured some organic material for the puppy to consume. He preferred softer, protein-based foodstuffs. If they were covered in thick brown liquid, he enjoyed them even more. But what to do with him now? I could not leave him in my midsection while I was in my charging station. The heat might make him uncomfortable or even damage him. I needed to find a safe place for my companion. I stopped inside a large maintenance shop near our hangar that was rarely used anymore. The interior was dusty, and cobwebs hung between the tall shelves. In the far corner stood a human supervisor's desk, also covered with a thick layer of dust. Under the desk, I established a resting place for Fluffy, using one of the drawers and the soft material extracted from the cushion on the chair. "Go to sleep, Fluffy," I said, placing him in the box. The dog promptly hopped out of the container and danced around my treads. He gave a tiny yip. "Quiet," I replied, using a normal tone. "You will be heard." The dog sat back on his haunches and looked up at me. "What do you require, Fluffy?" Although it was illogical to ask a question of an animal with which I had no linguistic compatibility, it also felt like the correct action to take in this situation. The dog scrabbled under the desk and returned with a wad of paper in his jaws. He dropped the paper on the floor and looked up at me. When I picked up the paper ball, he became very agitated. As an experiment, I threw it down the long aisle. Fluffy raced after it and returned with the object in his mouth. He dropped the paper on the floor in front of me. We repeated this activity until the wad of paper was a soggy mess. I crumbled another piece of paper into a new ball, and we continued until Fluffy was breathing heavily and his pink tongue lolled out of the side of his mouth. Then I put him to bed. Stroke, repeat. Stroke, repeat. The repetitive motion I used to pet Fluffy had a curious effect on the animal. His eyes closed, and his tiny chest heaved in time with my strokes along his back. As I had sufficient energy reserves, I switched to low power mode and stayed next to my new friend for the rest of the night. When I powered up the next morning, he was watching me. On the way to my duty station, we visited the waste receptacles near the human habitation zone and secured food for Fluffy. He reaffirmed his preference for protein-based material covered in sauce. When I held his food up, the dog stood on 2 legs and begged for his foodstuffs. It was a curious thing how my friend continued to learn new skills based on his environment. We robots are not like that, especially low-sentience models like me. That night, I had to cut our interaction period short. My power reserves were depleted, and a flashing icon in my display indicated a critical missed programming update. I placed Fluffy in his bed. He whined, and I knew that he wanted to play more, but I had to leave him. I stroked his fur, still fascinated by the way his soft hair registered with my low-sensory touch. "Good boy," I said. Fluffy rolled over to let me rub his abdomen. I complied, despite the red flashing lights in my display. My hangar docking station glowed as I backed in, and my power reserve indicator shifted from flashing red to steady yellow. Normally, we maintain a low-level awareness in our docking stations. But critical updates are different. The first step in an update is deactivation so our programming can be rewritten. I powered down. Sentience modification complete. That was the message in my display when I woke the next morning. My treads hummed on the sidewalk as I made my way to my assigned duties. Yip. I turned to find a small canine staring up at me. Its dark eyes searched my face. Ignoring him, I hoisted the next container onto the truck. Yip. The small creature demanded my attention. It had picked up a wad of paper in its jaws, which it dropped at my feet. I bent to pick up the object. The small canine, now in a sitting position, shook with excitement. It began to whine. Deep inside my programming, I had a flash of something. A feeling. Soft, bouncy fur. An echo of a name. The moment passed like a cloud crossing the sun. I dropped the wad of paper into the recycling container.
We hope you enjoyed Critical Update Required by David Bruns, read by C.B. Droege. If you'd like to make a donation to the author and narrator of this story, check out the story page link in the description and click the PayPal donate button, or pledge your support to us directly on Patreon. Would you like to submit a story to the Centropic Oracle? A link to our submission guidelines can be found in the description.